Alrighty, so we're still working on the same type of thing, but yesterday we had equations and we graphed them. Today we're going to have graphs and come up with equations, or we're going to have information and come up with equations, right? Kind of going backwards. As with a lot of things in Delta Math, it's possible that their explanations are a little bit different or the work looks a little bit different. Doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. Sometimes it is, like when they want you to convert to degrees to find your radians and then convert back, like that's dumb. Don't do that. But on these, when you look at the explanation, whether you get it right or wrong, they're using different letters here. We're not doing any horizontal shifts yet, so we don't have a C up there. They're using capital letters, and where we have A, B, and D, they have capital A, B, and C, but it doesn't matter. You might have done H and K in Algebra 2. Depending on where else you see it, they could be using P's and Q's. All right, so it doesn't really matter what the letter is. It's where the letter is what it does. Make sense? So don't obsess over the fact that the letters are different. Doesn't matter. If this is the setup we have, then this is the information that we get from it. So if we have this, we know that our amplitude is our absolute value of A. That's still our vertical stretch and compression like it has been. It's just called amplitude for sinusoidal functions. The period we don't get directly from the equation. Directly from the equation, we get the frequency, which is the absolute value of B. Then we can use that to find the period to graph it, and the period is 2 pi divided by the absolute value of B. But if we have the graph and we need B to write the equation, we might need to use the period to find B. So another way to look at this is that the absolute value of B is 2 pi divided by the period. So if you have one and you need the other, you just take 2 pi and divide it by that, you get the other one. Okay? Vertical shift is still D, which means the midline is y equals D. Okay? Everybody understands all that just fine, yes? All right. So the instructions here say, identify the amplitude, period, frequency, and midline of each function. Then write an equation for the function. So I want you to pay attention to one really tiny word in here, and that's the word an. It doesn't say write the equation. It says write an equation. That implies there's more than one answer, right? The equation would mean there's only one and that's it. An equation implies there's more than one answer. Now, given what we're going to talk about today, we should all get the same answer, but because we're not doing any shifting or reflecting yet. But I want you to see that although this looks like we're going to write an equation for a sine function, right? Couldn't it be a cosine function that was shifted to the right? Or a sine function that was shifted 2 pi to the left, and then it's going to look identical, right? So there's really an infinite amount of equations we could write to graph this thing, but since we're not doing any reflections or translations, there's really only one, okay? That's just a little tidbit about how things are worded there. So when I have the graph and I want to get this information, the first thing I'd want to do on there, just like the first thing I want to do when I graph, is draw in the midline, because that's going to help me with a couple of things. So there's my midline, right in the middle, just like it sounds. So with the midline, from the midline up to the maximum, that's going to be the length of my amplitude, which is 1. Frequency, how many cycles happen in 2 pi units? 0 to 2 pi, half of 1, right? And sometimes we could figure that out because we can see that here. And maybe it's like a third or something and you can't really tell. If we can't tell, that's okay. Maybe I can't fill that in right now. Maybe I could find the period instead. What's the period? 4 pi, okay? And, both of these I could figure out from this graph, but sometimes one might be easier than the other. So if I can figure out the period, then that absolute value of B is just 2 pi divided by the period, which is 4 pi, and that's how I could get the 1/2 mathematically instead of graphically. Midline then is y equals 1. And this looks like I would be graphing a sine function. So with all that information, I can then go and write my equation of the line, and I can say f of x, not an equation of a line. It's not an equation of a line. I don't know where my brain is here. F of x equals a. Since it's 1, I'm not putting anything. It's the sine of b, which is 1/2, x plus 1. And if there's no horizontal shifts or reflections, then that's what the equation would be for sure. We're good? Easy enough? It's just same information, just digging it out and putting it in different places here. All right, so let's look at number 2. First thing, again, I want to do is get in my midline. So I'm down here at -6, and I go to a +2. So that's 8 units total. So from the bottom, if I count up 1, 2, 3, 4, can make sure I'm in the middle. And then you can count from the middle up and the middle down to make sure you really hit the middle if you're not sure. Okay, so this looks like, starting on the y-axis, that I'm going to be doing a cosine function here. What is my amplitude? 4. Okay. Then I can trace one. I didn't feel like I needed to on the other one, but there's a lot going on here, so I think I'm going to trace one cycle. Right? So since I have that is one cycle, that means pi halves. Is that my period or my frequency? Period. That's the domain for one full cycle. So my period is pi halves. The frequency is how many full cycles can I get in 2 pi units? Well, I can get 1, 2 in pi units. So how many would I get in 2 pi units? 4. Or 4, better. I'm sorry. 4. But again, if I could figure out the period easily, the absolute value of b is just going to be 2 pi divided by pi halves. That's 2 pi times 2 over pi. And that's where that 4 comes from. Okay. My midline is at y equals -2. So my equation, f of x, equals amplitude, which is 4. I decided this was a cosine function. Frequency is 4 times x, and then I have a -2. What questions do you have? So since if we were doing horizontal shifts, you could pick one and we could look totally different. But since we're not shifting left or right, when I look at my axes here, I've got y and x. So if I'm starting anywhere other than the midline 0, if I start at the midline 0, 0, it's a sign because it would look like this, right? But I'm starting up here, and so if I look at this, I have it starting like that, and so that's how I know it's cosine. It's a good question. And that's another reason why I traced it, because when there's a lot going on, it was a little bit more obvious on number 1, but when there's a lot of little hills there, it's hard to tell. Good question. Anything else? All right, so you try number 3. Sine 2x. Frequency is how many, okay, so do you understand, like, that's one cycle before, it's how many cycles you get in 2 pi. Anything else? We're good on that one? Awesome. Then you do number 4. so I got 4 sine of x minus 2. Can we agree with that? So we've been writing these as f of x. It's also a y equals. I want you to know that it is a function, so I'm using f of x. I think, I looked at it this morning, but I've already forgot. I think in Delta Math it says y equals, but it's already typed for you. It's not like you can type the wrong thing. So we'll do these in y equals just because. So now we have information, and we're going to use this information without a graph to find our equations. So when I look at this, it says, first of all, I'm using a cosine function. Amplitude is 1/2, so that's my A. Midline of y equals -4, so that's the D. Period of 4 pi. So the absolute value of B is 2 pi divided by the period. So that means that B is going to be 1/2. So once I have all of that information, then I can say y equals or f of x is fine. A, which is 1/2, they told me it's cosine. B is 1/2. Don't forget your variable, x, and then minus 4. Easy enough? All right. So let's look at 6. Sine function, amplitude is 1. Midline is y equals 3, so that's D. Period is 2 pi, so what's the absolute value of B? 1, exactly. So this is y equals, since A is 1, I don't put anything. They told me a sine. B is 1, so it's just an x, and then it's just plus 3. Any questions on those? Then you do number 7. So what is my B value? 6, very good. Because this would be 2 pi times 3 over pi, and that's where the 6 is going to come from there. So that means that I get y equals, A is 3 times the sine of 6x, and then there's no plus or minus 0. Questions on that one? All right, you do number 8. You're done with 8. You can check yourself up here. If you don't have any questions, then go ahead and do number 9. Any questions at all on these? We good? Awesome. Your assignment is in Delta Math. Remember that you have a graphing assignment due tomorrow. I do have a key that you can check your work on. I'm making the key a little bit better. But you can work on the graphing part or you can work on the Delta Math part. Yeah, if you're done with the graphing, I'll take it.